No, I just.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. For those of you that were here earlier, I'm Laura McManus, the Curator of Education of the Maier Museum of Art at Randolph College. Director Martha Johnson regrets she is unable to be here today due to illness. I'd like to welcome you to the 32nd Annual Helen Clark Berlin Symposium. We begin this afternoon by recognizing that Randolph College resides on the traditional lands of the Monacan Indian Nation. We acknowledge the Monacan Indian Nation and their continued impact on this community. The Berlin Symposium is always held in conjunction with the college's annual exhibition of contemporary art. The first annual opened at the college in 1911. It is the longest running series of original exhibitions of contemporary art staged annually by an academic institution. Before we continue, I'd like to thank Mary Grace Shockey, class of 1969, and former trustee, who has generously supported every annual exhibition since the 100th, including this, the 112th annual exhibition, Back to Front Artist Books by Women. On the occasion of the 80th annual exhibition, friends and family of Helen Clark Berlin, class of 1958, established a symposium in her honor with the intent to expand and extend the educational impact of the exhibition. We are indeed fulfilling their goals today with this distinguished panel of women. Some of you may have attended the artist talks earlier this afternoon, so a few of my introductions will be familiar. Nia Easley is again joining us via Zoom from Chicago. Nia has 2 books in the exhibition, A Dozen Deaths and The Last Green Book. A Dozen Deaths is a counter-narrative in the form of 12 stories about Trayvon Martin's murder. The Last Green Book reveals the precariousness of travel in 1962 Chicago for African Americans. She earned her MFA in Visual Communication Design and practices in art informed by methods of design and production. Her work engages the absurdity, violence, and beauty of contemporary American life, focusing on our shared histories and how they have shaped the current landscape. She is a lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Lyall Harris has 3 works in the exhibition. Grace is an artist's book presented in 3 different forms. Harris's 2 additional pieces are collaborations with Patricia Silva. The Unapologetic Initiative is a mixed media interactive installation engaging visitors throughout the run of the exhibition, and Without Fault turns questions of conventional beauty upside down, pointing out the humor and tragedy in vintage beauty guides, with echoes of today's impossible social media standard of beauty. Harris holds a BA in Art History from Northwestern University and an MFA in Book Art and Creative Writing from Mills College as the inaugural graduate in the nation's first MFA of this kind. She teaches book arts and creative writing workshops and classes, most recently at James Madison University, the University of Virginia, and the Virginia Center for the Book. I should also note that she will be teaching a workshop here next Saturday. There are a few tickets available if you'd like to join us. Also on the panel, Martha Chiplis. She curated Back to Front Artist Books by Women. She holds an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She worked for Sherwin Beach Press as a letterpress printer and designer for 16 years, and currently teaches at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She co-authored For the Love of Letterpress, a printing handbook for instructors and students, published by Bloomsbury and now in its 2nd edition. I do want to add a personal note from Martha Johnson, who has known Martha Chiplis since 1998. From Martha, quote, "This is the first time we have collaborated and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Martha, you have curated a phenomenal exhibition and it is with such pride that we present it." We are also honored today to welcome Lynora Williams, our distinguished moderator. Williams is former director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Betty Boyd Dietrich Library and Research Center. Prior to joining the National Museum of Women in the Arts, she served as librarian at the Textile Museum at George Washington University. Williams curated Holding Ground, artist books for the National Museum of Women in the Arts, opening in conjunction with the grand reopening of the National Museum of Women in Arts, following a 2-year renovation. Holding Ground also opened the same weekend as Back to Front. Lynora, I hope that you will say a little bit about that exhibition and the grand reopening of the museum. And so everyone, please join me in welcoming our panelists and our moderator.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. I'm so glad to be here. I want to thank everybody at the Maier Museum for this amazing exhibition and for organizing this symposium. So sorry that Martha Johnson couldn't be with us because I know how hard she worked to make everything happen, but life intervenes and we're carrying on without her. So the good thing is that you're here and we hopefully can have a good discussion today. Before we get into our dialogue, I often like to start with just talking about the issue of what is an artist book. I know that you've looked at all these works here and you probably feel like you have a good idea, but an artist book holds a somewhat confusing niche in the world of art. So let's start with some definitions. For me, the simplest way I usually put it is that an artist book is a work of art that pays honor to the form of a book in some way. It's inspired by the form of a book. But that's my kind of simple one-liner. I often like to share a definition that I came across from the Smithsonian libraries, which is a bit longer, but I think really covers the waterfront in terms of how to think about an artist book. Smithsonian Library said, an artist book is a medium of artistic expression that uses the form or function of, quote, book as inspiration. It is the artistic initiative seen in the illustration, choice of materials, creation process, layout, and design that makes it an art object. A book that only contains text is simply a book. Even if authored by an artist, it would be a book that belongs in a bookstore or the shelves of a library. What truly makes an artist book is the artist's intent. An artist have used the book as an inspiration in a myriad of ways and techniques, from the traditional to the experimental. The book could be made through fine press printing or handcrafted, the pages illustrated with computer-generated images or cheap photocopies. Books became sculptures, tiny and gargantuan. Books were sliced up and reconfigured, made from all kinds of materials with unconventional objects incorporated, in unique or limited editions, or produced in multiple copies. With all sorts of ideas behind them, artists continue to challenge the idea, content, and structure of the traditional book. So I personally have found that description pretty helpful in thinking about what is this thing called an artist book. As Laura said, I am the retired library director of National Museum of Women in the Arts, and Martha Johnson asked that I tell you a little bit about the museum and about the exhibition that just opened there. The trick will be for me to make it a little bit, because I can kind of go on about these things. But if you are not familiar, the National Museum of Women in the Arts Arts was established in 1987 in Washington, D.C. It's an independent museum. People often think, well, maybe it's part of the Smithsonian. It is not. It's an independent museum. And it has been thriving in this beautiful old building that was once a Masonic lodge that excluded women from attending or entering its walls. And so we always kind of relish the irony of that. NIMWA, as we call it, was closed for about 2 years so that it could do a top-to-bottom renovation, a renovation that cost almost $70 million. Very extensive reworking of the building. And so we're talking about everything from redoing the roof, which had been damaged in an earthquake, to upgrading the HVAC system, to improving the galleries. In particular, raising the ceilings in the galleries so that larger works of art could be shown. Just a huge, huge undertaking. And the museum reopened to the public just 2 weeks ago. So it's a time of great celebration in the NIMWA family. One of the collections that is unique to NIMWA is its collection of artist books. That collection was started even before the museum became a museum. And it was initiated by a woman named Christina Wasserman. And Christina, some of you may be familiar with her work. She wrote a book called The Book as Art. And she was the founding librarian at NIMWA, and then she became the curator of book art there. And largely under her guidance, the museum amassed a collection of approximately 1,000 artist books by women. So although there are much larger collections of artist books around the country, that is certainly one of the largest collections devoted exclusively to work by women. It's because NIMWA had this collection that we asked ourselves, how could we honor that collection in the reopening process of the museum? And we decided to commission some new works as a celebration. And so our project became ultimately this exhibition called Holding Ground. We commissioned works from 9 different artists, and we asked them to create books that honored the museum's mission of advocating for women in the arts. What we got, and I really encourage you to try to get up to DC to see that exhibition and the many other exhibitions that are there now. What we got were 9 incredibly varied and all very stunning, in my opinion, artist books that kind of fell into 3 categories. Some of them very directly honored the museum as an institution. For instance, one of the artists, a young artist who is just entering the art world, she made a replica of the building as her work. So that kind of is one category. Another category honored some of the work in the NIMWA collection. So for instance, one of the books, which is by Ajala Burroughs, pays homage to the artist Alma Thomas. So that was kind of another loose category. And these are very loose categories that kind of became apparent after these books came in. And then the third category I felt was works that just really spoke to women creating and holding ground for their own creative expression in many different ways. And actually so excited that one of the artists who produced a work called A Dwelling for Her Story is actually with us today. eBay, raise your hand. eBay did an amazing book that is in the form of a dwelling with all handmade paper and hand-stitched, and just a great ode, I would say, to the African-American woman's experience in particular. So that we thank you, eBay. So, as I said, I could go on ad nauseum. I'm going to stop. This is not my platform. We want to hear from all these artists. Nia, you still there?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. Well, let us get started then. Now that we kind of are all on the same plane about what is an artist book, I want to start by asking each of you to talk about how you came to artist books as your medium. I think every one of you has worked in a medium other than artist books, whether you're sculpting, painting, doing installation. So what is it that drew you to the book? Yeah, let's start with you.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah, it's with you.
Yes. Okay. I really came to artist books because I was a student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for two reasons. One, we have the wonderful collection, the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection there, and that became a really inspiring resource for me. And also, I think I mentioned in my talk as well, I was working with the artist Ann Tyler, whose primary artistic output at that point in her career was artist books. And so, in thinking through ways that I could tell stories sort of encounter my audience in a more personal and intimate way, books became the thing that I was working on at that time. That's how I came to it. Obviously, I have other things in my arsenal as well, but I'm very, very grateful that I found artist books.
Well, Martha.
Hello. Can you hear me? All right. So, actually, similar to Nia, I was a student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I was interested in painting and printmaking and drawing, and I thought graphic design maybe. So I took a typography class, and that typography class turned out to be a letterpress printing class, and the person who taught it was Kathy Ruby Saunders, and I came back and took more classes from her and learned how to make artist books. She is a book artist, and she has 2 pieces actually in this exhibit, and so I started making books and became a letterpress printer. So I've done other things also since then, it was kind of a coming together of poetry and design and imagery, I guess.
For me, I was primarily a painter and began writing poetry, although I hadn't really studied it formally, and that was one reason I wanted to go back and get an MFA in poetry. I felt like I needed to be more studied in it. I was living in Italy, and there's one of my favorite things to do is go visit art supply stores, even if I don't buy anything. I just love to look at them and Florence has, you can imagine. And I came across this beautiful handmade Sicilian paper, and I thought, well, this is just too beautiful to paint on. And what if I did something with it? And I started to make sculptural forms, and I couldn't figure out how to get my words into this. So I really was frustrated with getting language into the books. But fast forward some years, I made a lot of these things, and I moved to San Francisco and took some class, and it's graphic design or something, and the woman said, you know, because I showed her some of these structures, and she said, you know what you're doing, don't you? And I said, I don't know, folding paper. She said, no, you're making book art. And I said, I had never heard that. And she said, and furthermore, there's a center, the San Francisco Center for the Book. I think you better get over there. And I did, and I never left for, I don't know, all those years I lived in San Francisco.
That's a great story. And that actually, it leads into my next question, which is, one of the things that makes me love artist books is that they come in so many different forms. And I, again, really saw this in this Holding Ground exhibition. Some of you who may have been here earlier today may have received this little primer on artist books, which talks about all the different forms that you can use to create a book. You know, anything from the, quote, traditional or codex form, which is a book that we're accustomed to accordion books like we see on the back wall there, to very sculptural works, and pop-up books like Colette Fou's work there. Just an amazing variety of structures. And so I'm very curious from the three of you if there's structures that speak to you more than others, and what structure you find yourself gravitating to in your own creation books.
If I may, Nia, I love your structure of the 12. And I think you said that was kind of experimental for you, or was that something that existed, or did you make that up, or it's so suited to what the content of that is?
Thank you. That was a structure for me. I was experimenting with different forms, but again, I had the opportunity to visit the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection and just look at a lot of different kinds of forms and think about what structure I wanted to hold the content. And I came across a book by Kazuko Watanabe called The Diary of a Sparrow, and he uses this structure. And so I borrowed that from that artist. And in terms of like a preferred structure, I don't really think I have one. I do like making and playing around with flip books, I have to say, Lynora. It's a lot of fun, but it's really determined by, because for me, the book, like many of the other forms I work with, it's a container for the story or the message. So it's really a lot of experimenting and playing around with lots of different things to see what's going to work best, and I try not to just stick to one form.
I was going to say that as thinking about curating this exhibit, and when I'm taking student work or talking to students about their work, I always like to talk about accordions, because an accordion book or any kind of version of an accordion can be shown in a gallery without being touched. You can see more of the book, so that's a big plus for that in this kind of environment. But when I'm thinking about books that will be in a library or in your own collection or in my collection, I just like to think about what is the most appropriate structure for that content, like just like what Nia was saying actually.
I echo that completely. I mean, for me, it's absolutely, what is the form that will not only be a container, but be a conveyor of the meaning? And for example, the book Grace, I really struggled with what is going to be the form of that? And then I had this idea of because I wanted to bring the correspondence really at the heart of it. And so the translucent envelopes, you know, so there's a nod to correspondence. But it is very much this moment of aha to find the form that's right for the content at hand.
Well, speaking of the relationship of form and content, I've become kind of fascinated with this quote, which is from Johanna Drucker. And she's an art historian who's a specialist in the book. And she wrote one of the few, full-length scholarly books on artist books. And one of the things she's written is, the space of a book is intimate and public at the same time. It mediates between private reflection and broad communication in a way that matches many women's lived experience. So, I want to know what you all think about that quote. Nia's nodding, so we'll start with her.
Yeah, I think that it's true, but beyond that, one of the reasons I like working with the artist book form, I kind of alluded to this, is that space of intimacy that you can get with your reader. It depending on the book and the form, right? It can be very much this one-on-one experience. They can spend time with it, go forward and backward, and also the materiality, the ability to transmit information tactilely as well as visually and verbally. But how this relates to women's lived experience, the sort of ways in which our subjectivity is coded in our public presentation, I think, is sort of what I'm reading in this broad communication term. And then the private reflection is sort of like how you build yourself into and around all of those things. I'm curious to see what other people are going to say as well, and maybe riff on that a little more.
Well, I think yes, and it's kind of obvious. Like you're reading someone who creates a book, creates it privately, and then they want it to be seen by a larger public. They want it to go out in the world and be on its own, or affecting more people. I guess my question is that true more of women than of men? I'm not really sure that is true, but I'm willing to hear.
I had a similar quandary. I was kind of wondering, what is it that's, women about that? But so this somehow connects for me to the sort of gendered medium of sewing and bookmaking, and it was actually a quote. I had the pleasure to go visit the National what do you call it? Nîmois last weekend, and in the larger museum, there's some beautiful work to see. I mean, really, I recommend going. And I really loved some of the text on the wall to kind of orient you in the rooms, because the curation is quite innovative. And I really thought this phrase struck me, and it was about the hierarchy of materials and how sculpture and painting are really, there's a hierarchy. They're more important than stitching or fiber arts. You know, why is that? Because so many men sort of are connected to painting and sculpture. So it's sort of, there's this hierarchy, and something about that quote to me starts to go into that zone of, well, this is kind of women's work or something. And I guess I kind of take issue with that. Also, this notion of craft versus art, right? And so I'm a little surprised, because I know her as a scholar, that I would even be saying this, because she's a very avant-garde, very forward-thinking woman, right? But and I don't know that she intended what I'm saying at all. It brings me into the zone of women's work, and then this whole question of craft and the hierarchy. So I'm probably not really answering the question, but
That's okay.
but it makes me think in those areas.
I think we're going to just keep circling back to this, because it can be thorny. I mean, personally, I think I read it a little bit more the way that Nia does, but I'm interested in other views too, so we'll keep thinking about it collectively. Let's move a little bit from form to content. It seems to me that in the last at least couple of decades, we've seen the creation and display of artist books that are increasingly being used in projects that have to do with social justice themes. The first thing I think about is Clarissa Sly's work, which has consistently tackled issues of racial justice. We have at least two of her works here. And I also think about a show that was called Mutanabi Street. And that show, I don't know the exact dates of it. I want to say about 8 years ago. It was a traveling exhibition of artist books that was initiated after the bombing of a street in Baghdad that was known as a bookseller street. So, of course, led to the destruction of many important little bookstores. And so there were more than 250 artist books that were created as sadness about that bombing. And it traveled all over the world. I know there are many, many other examples of this social justice orientation in artist books. But I'm interested in knowing if the three of you think this is actually a trend, or did I make this up? And do you think artist books lend themselves to social justice messages in any way? Anybody?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I can't see, so I'm sorry if I'm
Okay. I wasn't
wasn't
sure if you
so
could see
clear.
this or not.
But I feel like all art lends itself to speaking on social and political matters. And so artist books are no different. Whether that is a recent trend or if there's been an uptick, I'm gonna have to trust you as the librarian. I don't know that I've seen enough or have a broad enough scope to say, like, you know, is this happening more than it was before? It seems like a lot of the artist books that I will look to for inspiration are artists that I look at from the recent past, not that long ago, but 90s, 80s, are still using political content. I'm thinking about work about like the AIDS movement or about around the Iraq War, the first one and the second one. Or even prior to that, the Civil Rights Movement, although those may not have been recognized as artist books at the time. I don't know.
What do you think, Lyall?
I'm not in a position to talk about trends. I do think you are. I can only know that I have made a few, and one of them is what I presented earlier, paper boats. And another one that I sort of flashed up here called White Privilege Likes, and it's regarding, well, I live in Charlottesville and moved there right as the statute debate was occurring, and as a white privileged person, was looking at my privilege and thinking about what white privilege likes. And so it's a critique of that, and it's a flag book with that sort of pops out at you. So, and then I also, my very first day living in Charlottesville, came across the slave auction block in Court Square. I found myself right there standing looking at it, and I just thought, wow, I lived right down the street. And I ended up making a book called Sight about the slave auction block. But these are, I can't, it wasn't in response to a trend, it was more sort of, it's like, as an artist, and I think that the project I referred to when I made a new book a week, you develop a kind of antenna, even though I'm full of blind spots, but it's like things that are in the air and in your life, and when they touch you deeply, and in my case, this is my language, so I make something about it. And living in the South again, in a place like Charlottesville, since 2015, when I was there for the 2017 event, you can't not make something if you're a responsible human in the world. I don't know that art books don't lend themselves any more than anything else, and I think that depends on you, the reader, and you, the viewer. One of the most powerful things I've seen of late were slides of George Floyd projected onto the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond. That was more powerful than an artist book, and I'm a proponent of artist books. But so it depends maybe on the time, the context, and the viewer.
Yeah, and I will also say, I think one of the benefits, or one of the qualities of the artist book that makes it unique is the fact that you can, so for me, A Dozen Deaths sits in 4 different libraries around the country, right? And then it's available to anyone who can visit those libraries, and it will be preserved by those libraries for however long they last, ostensibly, right? So in that way, that sort of method of preservation and sharing and putting on shows like the one today at the Maier Museum, the way that those libraries may choose to show and display and promote their holdings, I think, is like a possible benefit to using that form.
Well, you can't see me, Nia, but I was shaking my head vigorously, so, as the librarian and the crew here. Martha, did you want to add anything?
I guess I would just say that I feel like artists, they make art, they feel responsible about making art about things that are important to them. And so I think political and social subjects have been part of that. And I'm not sure that there's an increasing trend of artist books being about social and political subjects, but I do feel like it is something that I'm interested in seeing. So I'm drawn to pieces that are, and I want to see different points of view, I guess, from the art that I'm looking at.
know that, or at least it's my understanding that one of the impetuses, is that a word, for this show here that we're sitting among was the increase of book censorship and book banning. We're living in a time of kind of, at least not since the McCarthy era, where we've seen so much backlash against books. I was just wondering, since you're all bookmakers, if you could give us some comments about this time that we're in and where you see things going or what your thoughts are.
I guess I'm intrigued by the question, what are we so afraid of? And are we to remove critical thinking? That's all I have to say.
Here, here. I'm, in the state of Illinois where we just passed a law that requires libraries, so Illinois public libraries, in order to be eligible for state funds, must adopt the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, which says that materials should not be excluded because of their origin, background, or the views of those contributing to their creation. And that seems perfectly reasonable to me, and also what Lyall said. What are we so afraid of? Books are amazing and should be protected.
I did have a thought, and suggested this to the mayor. I don't know if they'll do it or not for Randolph College, but if students on campus, if there were a couple of places on campus where they could just write down a book that was pivotal to them in their lives and put it up on the board and think about what would your life be if you hadn't read that book? And who's to say that would be an array of so many different books. Which one are we gonna take off the board?
Again, as Nia said, I live in Illinois, and we have this new law. So I feel lucky to be in a place where there are people who don't want book banning, but I know that it's definitely an issue in other places, and even in Illinois, because there are libraries that are still going to remove books. I can't imagine not being able to go to the library when I was a young person riding my bike to the library, a kid, to get books, and I could just go to any part of the library and get whatever book I wanted. I went to the adult section. I went to, when I got tired of the children's books, but I can't imagine if that hadn't been allowed. So I am concerned about the issue.
At Women in the Arts, one of the exhibitions I put together was called Power in My Hand, and it was kind of exploring the relationship between artists and poets. In particular, poetry in praise of art, not exclusively, but we tried to, just also as an example, in that collection at Women in the Arts, there are quite a few books, artist books, that are connecting to Emily Dickinson. It seemed kind of an obvious exhibition to put together. I know you're a poet, and I'm interested in hearing, about working with poets and using poetry in artist books.
Well, I've started artist books because I was a poet. I don't really write poetry now, but I'm still really interested in poetry. I took a class when I was an undergraduate, the poet singing in the artist house, the poet something in the artist house. So it was all everything that we read was poetry about art, and then we wrote poetry. So I think of it as being entwined, I guess. Nia, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to add on to that and say that I find poetry to be so inspiring, and my talk was, the title was pulled from a poem by Lucille Clifton, and just the expediency of language and the ability to elicit feeling through language. If I can make a thing that isn't a poem, but that can do a similar thing, I feel like I've been successful.
I think when I use poetry in my books, ultimately it's the poem is enhanced by the structure. So it's not just to kind of print my poems in a book, it's that the book and the poem are doing a third thing. And I have worked with one, it's usually my poetry, but I did once collaborate in Italy with a wonderful poet, Elisa Biagini. She's very well known in Italy. And she gave me 10 little short fragments of beautiful poetry. And I said, oh, okay, let me see what I'm going to do with this. And it was a kind of writing that really, it had this kind of folding interior and unfolding, and I came up with a flexagon structure, which is kind of a Jacob's ladder type of structure. And I was so happy with how it married this, what her poetry was already doing in language. So for me, that's why I put sometimes poetry in books, but it's also true that many successful artist books, and many of the ones in the show you curated, are wordless.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Well, that leads me to the issue of collaboration, because you just spoke about collaborating with a poet, but I know there's many other kinds of collaborations as well, and I was wondering if you all could talk about any particularly rewarding collaborations you've done, or if you feel like collaboration is not for you. Can you talk about that and tell us a little bit why? Nia, can we start with you?
Sure. Sorry, can you say the very last part of the question? If collaboration is...
I said if you haven't done collaborations.
Oh, okay. I love collaborating. And for example, with the last free book, that was a project that was partially funded through like a micro grant from a design firm, Sonnenzimmer. So Design Bureau Sonnenzimmer funded and sort of talked me through the process, and then I collaborated with a friend of mine who's a photographer who had that fancy, beautiful Hasselblad camera. So she walked me through using it, and we went to the sites together to photograph all 55 locations that were listed in the Green Book. And I find that the conversations that I have with other artists when I'm working through a project, whether we're collaborating or not, just really help to enrich both the process for me and ultimately the final project itself. I'm always encouraging my students to collaborate informally or formally on their projects.
I guess the biggest project that I've collaborated on that brings to mind is my I wrote this book with my former teacher, Kathy Saunders, for the Love of Letterpress, and we have made printed pieces together, also designed and printed. But this was like a longer project that was over like a year and a half or longer, it seemed longer. And we were really like thinking through a lot of like how we teach and how she teaches and how. And then we picked we had like a call for entry for all the images in the book, so we had a lot of artist book pieces in it, and that was like a wonderful, rewarding project, I guess. And I also really love collaborating.
I think I would have answered that question as collaboration is not for me, except that I met this woman, Patricia Silva, in Italy, and we just had this magic. And we began collaborating, and I knew nothing about Patricia. Patricia doesn't have any work online, so I Googled and Googled, couldn't find anything. And we started with that material exchange I mentioned. And I started the first book and gave her these materials as an inspiration. And when she brought the halfway point of the book back, we did this in 2 weeks, so we'd make a book in a month. That ended up taking longer down the road, but so 2 weeks later we met, of course, over coffee, and looked at this halfway point, and it was like Christmas. I saw her, I didn't know anything about her talents. I knew she taught book art, but I was blown away, and I was so humbled, and I thought, how am I going to possibly intervene on this thing and finish it? I mean, I can't do any better. What am I going to do? And so I knew that I was in good hands with Patricia. And what was so beautiful about collaborating, it is beautiful about collaborating with Patricia, while we share skill sets, we also don't. And so she did some things on that book, for example, and on all of them, that I just simply don't have in my toolkit, but now I do, because she did it and I learned from it. So that suturing I showed at the foredge of for that book earlier, that's something she did to one of our books. Now it wasn't suturing, it wasn't a suturing thread, but it was kind of, she did certain kinds of stitching and just, so I have learned and grown as an artist so much, thanks to Patricia. And I am, I think we'll collaborate until our dying days, I hope.
That's saying a lot. It's beautiful. Nia, your Green Book project is all about place. I mean, all about place. And a fair amount of artist books are about place. Maybe not like Nia's work is, but that is a recurring theme, I think, in artist books. Whether you're meditating on your backyard or a bigger neighborhood scenario like Nia's Green Book. And I just thought I would ask you all to talk a little bit about artist books and place. Lyall, you start.
I have to think about that one.
She said,
Nia, do you have a...
we'll start.
You're
Go ahead.
You're in it.
Well, so the first thing that comes to mind for me is this Rebecca Solnit quote where she says, "Places are leaky containers." And I feel like there's so, for me, it's funny to me, with the Green Book project, for example, my initial impulse was to just follow this guide, visit the locations, and see what happens. See what I felt in these spaces. What did I notice? Did people talk to me? Did I get any stories? That was going to guide the project. And immediately, time after place after place, I'm running into these empty lots, right? So it's, in some ways, I feel like the job of an artist is connecting these dots. And in a lot of ways, the way that I'm connecting these dots is like reading the place that something happens, or in this case, the places that I'm visiting according to this guide. Also, growing up in Chicago, I visited the Art Institute since I was like 3 years old. We would always go look at the Monet haystacks, right? That's another version of looking at place. You go to the same place, different times of year, different times of day, and just paint the same thing. I don't know how to separate being a person in the world and like thinking about place, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And if you're an artist and you're so very sensitive to the world around you, that is just like becomes enmeshed in the way, for me, that I work.
Do either of you want to add anything?
I mean, I think I'm sort of saying maybe the same thing, that places I've lived, so now Charlottesville, I already mentioned that, and the book for that and Kaleidoscope, and that year that I made 52 books, probably 45 of them are about immigration in Italy and what was going on right around me. We lived right next to an immigration home. These were legal immigrants, but it was not a great situation, and there were children living there with their families who, this was not set up for children, but the need was such that now some families lived in this home. And I found myself seeing these kids at my little local school. My girls went to elementary school, and they would then come over for play dates. And I began to sort of have an entree into the immigration home, and it was a very, very complicated reality. And I started to tutor the kids because their parents didn't speak Italian. And I inevitably, my books addressed these experiences I was having. But I've never really thought about place in the way that you asked, because I sort of think of the book as place. The place of the book. It is just like reading a fiction book. It takes us to a place in our hearts or minds, yeah. So.
I did make a book for the Quarantine Public Library. It's in the Quarantine Public Library area, and it is about insects that I observed in our backyard. And it did happen during COVID, and I was spending a lot of time at home, and I had been interested in gardening, so we have a lot of plants in our tiny yard, and I was able to observe these praying mantis babies be born. I just happened to be there at that moment, and I guess that is about place or being in the moment, or because I looked, every year since that happened, and I've never seen that again. And I never saw it before that either. So I guess it was about place, but also time in that moment.
It's hard to separate them. I'm coming right back to you, Martha. You curated this exhibition, which we all love. Wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the process of curating artists' book exhibitions, and if you've curated other exhibitions, if you could talk a little bit about them. What are some of the challenges and rewards?
This is the first artist book exhibition that I've curated that was not student work. I've been involved in the grant committee for the Castle Club in Chicago, which is a bibliophilic club, and every year I was on the committee that reviewed all the work that was submitted for these grants. So I've seen a lot of work that way, and it's, book arts grants. And I also teach book arts at the School of the Art Institute. So when I put together student shows at the Lincoln Library of that work, and then I wrote this book with my friend, former teacher, where we curated all the submitted work. But then this was the first real. And Martha Chiplis Johnson was, she's the one who asked me to do it, and I'm so excited and happy to work with her, my new friend from University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she made everything happen, and Lyall did so much, and everyone who worked with Maier it wouldn't have happened without them. So I don't know what else to say except that I love artist books and book arts, and I know a lot of book artists from when I worked for a fine press and would go to book shows, book fairs, and we would sell our books, and I got to look at all the other books that were often very different from what we were making. So I got to know a lot of different kinds of books, and that's what I tried to draw my very favorite things to this exhibit.
I mean, there's such a variety. So you wanted to show also the object.
Oh yes, so that was one of the first things that we said was that, and this is probably not going to sound good, but high and low, kind of like, and because I have been involved in selling art books, expensive. I was thinking about expensive books and inexpensive books, and then books that you can handle and books that you cannot touch, that are very fragile. So, and then we were restricted, obviously, by the what could be done in this amount of time, which is not a lot of time. So
You did a lot.
yeah.
And I didn't say this, but the Unapologetic is not a book, but it's going to be. We're not sure. We're getting still gathering. So it's, I think, the one thing that's not maybe really a book form, although there are broadsides.
Well, you could argue that there are various things that aren't.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. Nia, is there anything you want to say about curation?
No,
Okay.
I'm really sad that I couldn't be there to see the show, is all I want to say. It's great.
Hopefully you'll get here later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Lyall, there might be something happening with Virginia, is it right, in March?
In March, so this show will be up for 5 months total. It's going to come down the third week of March, which overlaps intentionally with the Virginia Festival of the Book, which is a beautiful festival we have in Charlottesville. It's under new directorship as of about a year, and the goal is to have more events throughout the state. And I am so happy that the mayor has now coordinated with the festival, and there will be a festival pre-event here sometime in March, and I will be part of that, and I'm not sure what I'm doing yet, but it'll be fun. And a Randolph College poet professor will be joining me in that endeavor, so that's really exciting.
Great. And now, you all just touched on this, I want to explore a little more. And that's the issue of displaying artist books, which is a vexing conundrum. Obviously, in the book, you want to see the pages. I mean, we've actually touched on this a little bit more than once in our discussion so far. But you also want to protect the book. So what do you all think? What's the answer? We're searching.
Well, we talked about this a lot, when we were working on this exhibit, and I mean, the ideal solution is you become a collector of artist books, so, and you buy the ones that you want to touch the most. otherwise, you have to go to special collections to see them, and that can be a problem because, at least in Chicago, there are collections that the artist books aren't cataloged, so you rely on the person who's in charge of whatever collection they're in to, you tell them what you want and they help steer you, or you go see an exhibit where you can't touch them. But yeah, but there are videos of books. That's the other thing that you can do. So videos of books on YouTube or wherever, and the mayor is working on collecting some of these videos, and we're making some, and also statements, and they're gonna create some QR codes to put next to labels for this.
As far as solutions, I was the video, and as I mentioned, I made a digital copy. So when possible, it's not great, it's not perfect, but where a viewer can handle it. I think this gets to the question of the inaccessibility in general of these works. So when you have this kind of these precious objects that are under glass, and then they get sold to libraries, and then you have to have access to that institution. So it's not only a niche medium, it's also maybe an elite one in a way. I mean, so Johanna Drucker talked about the democratic multiple. So how to make, for example, digital copies or the zines that are out in the quarantine library. This is one way, and there's a whole, practice of that kind of thing, just accessible, the democratic multiple objects. And I'm all for that. It's just that, what if you want to make a book about that I made Grace or whatever, and that actually has a lot of digital elements, but it's nevertheless housed in this kind of precious container. So it really is a vexing problem. I don't know, but I'm very aware of it, and also where these objects live. I have tried to, and I'm a little bit still doing it, but contacted for paper boats, for example. I wrote to, maybe public libraries around the country and said, I will donate this book to your library because I think it's important to have access and to support the public libraries. And I've only had one taker so far. But I think it's because people don't open mail, and they maybe haven't read, my mail. So, because I wrote it the old-fashioned way. These were not emails.
That is amazing, and I hadn't considered reaching out to libraries to donate a copy, but yeah, there's nothing like physically handling these books. And again, I feel very fortunate to be in Chicago with the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection, being also open to the public by appointment. And it is like we've been talking about the beauty of structure, for example, and the content that is held within the materiality of the book form itself. And that just doesn't lend itself to a digital version. So how do you translate those things? This is an issue. This is like a big current problem, I think. That was some feedback I also got about A Dozen Deaths as a book, and the form, and it being a limited edition of 5 copies, right? Yeah, there is no great answer to that.
We'll keep working on it. Just to compound the problem, there's a book in Holding Ground that the artist used scent as her artistic medium. And it has a very powerful, beautiful scent. She used 5 or 6 different scents, but once it's in the vitrine, that whole aspect of the work is lost. It's disappointing, but there's no alternative. I hope someday to go to the Bainbridge Museum because almost their whole collection, I believe, is artist books, and I'm very curious to see how they handle this issue. I would say, put in a plug, if you do love artist books and you want to see more, contact the librarians because they're happy to bring those books out and share with you. no librarian likes to have her artist books just stuck in a vault somewhere. So don't hesitate to reach out to a library that has a collection that you might want to see a few books. Don't be shy about that, is what I want to say. Time is flying. Just a couple more questions here, quickie ones, and then we'll open it up for some question and answer. I was hoping that each of you could just tell me what your most rewarding experience as a book artist was. Either a book that you made, or an experience you had in sharing that book, or a book that you saw.
There are too many to list ones I've seen that I think, why didn't I think of that? The simple one, the simple gesture. So I remember this one book, I mean, this just popped in my mind right now, you're asking that, where it's a very, very thick stack of pages, and I think they're thick pages too, and you open it, and it just looks like two dots, and you keep opening, it's actually moves, and the dots are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you realize that these are the Twin Towers. So, that's a simple gesture,
Yeah.
but it's so powerful, no text. For me, to your question of the most magical moment, I think it's just every time I think, oh, that's the right structure for the content.
Martha?
Well, now that I started teaching book arts in 2008, I get really excited when students get excited about book arts. So in my case, I'm teaching letterpress printing, and when I was teaching the book arts part of letterpress printing, it was just so exciting when they would come into the studio and they would say that, this is magic, and how and seeing how you can set type, and it's nothing like digital type. And the way you think about it is completely different, and I guess that's very rewarding and exciting. And I mean, I can't go into all the books that I've been excited about to see. Yeah.
Sounds good. Nia?
Yeah, this is a really hard question just because there are so many moments when I start thinking about magic moments with artist books.
You can give us one.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you two.
Okay. Bonus.
One is with the last Green book. So these are places in Chicago, and a friend of mine who had a copy shared it with their mother, and then their mother was going through and looking at the names of the jazz clubs and the different places, and then remembering her experiences with her parents going to some of these places. And that was just this beautiful intergenerational moment of remembrance, and it just did it so much in such a simple form. I was so grateful to hear about these experiences, and I just felt amazing having been able to facilitate that through this object, right? And then I think the second one for me, just seeing a book where I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I recently was introduced to the artist Terrence Simon has a book called The Color of a Flea's Eye, where they were somehow made aware of the fact that the New York Public Library was going to get rid of their image files because they felt like with the internet, what was the point of having a library storage of image files anymore? And they said, oh, wait, can I take a look at those files before you throw them away? and then ended up making this amazing book, putting together an exhibition based on the files, and then the library decided to keep the files after. So, I mean, just this beautiful sort of impulse to do something with the thing that then kind of changed the world in a way. Yeah.
The power of the book, right? Yeah. Okay, the very last question from me, and I imagine Martha, well, all of you all are teachers, but what is some advice you would give to a novice bookmaker, book artist? Someone who's just starting to enter the world of book artists.
I would say to go to an artist book collection and look at all their books, and also to just make what makes you happy. Mm-hmm.
How's that sound?
That sounds great. I mean, definitely leave your house, go to the library. Everything's not online. That's what my students try to tell me, that, oh, it's okay, it's online, I can just look at it online.
No.
But it's really a different experience seeing it, seeing, artist books in person. So yeah, just try things. It's okay to fail. Yeah, and you can make more things out of, supposed failures.
Well, I think of what you said about when you got into librarianship, last night, you said a light bulb went off when I was taking these classes, and I think if a light bulb has to go off in your medium, or, this is a niche field, nobody even knows what this is. My dad's still asking, what is it you do? So, hey, don't do this unless it's sort of calling. That's what I would say.
I like that. Do any of you all have questions for these amazing artist peoples?
I'm a questioner. I always have a question.
Go for it, eBay.
So my question is about letting go, because you put a lot of work into creating. Sometimes it's a unique artist book. Sometimes it's an edition. And there are two places. There is the private self, where you interact with the piece, and then it's the library or the repository or the community that owns it. How do you let go? And do you?
We're going to have to let go of everything.
Yes. You just take joy in the work of making it and putting it out into the world, and fingers crossed people see it.
Yeah, so that you make it, I think of making things that I like, that I would like someone, and then put it out to the world, and you hope that that's what happens. Other people will like it, and it'll go on and live its own life separate from you.
But Ibe, you're an artist, so you know this.
Yeah.
The next thing calls you. The next thing that is pressing to make. And that makes it a lot easier to let the previous thing go.
Absolutely, because if you just held on to everything, you'd soon run out of space.
Artist books don't take up that much time.
I think as though, even though you may get paid for your book, in essence, it is a contribution. You don't have to give it, because you've given it as a contribution, as a gift to the world, to see what they think of it and how it inspires them. And, that's how I think of it.
Any other questions? We answered all the questions. Shall we wrap up?
I think so. Do you have any parting words?
Just thank you all for coming. I really encourage you to explore the world of artist books and keep up with these good women's work.
Thank you. Thank you.